Hello, my name is Maria Jolicoeur. Welcome to my show, Let's Talk About History. I'm here at Slater Museum, and they're having a lecture on the Civil War. I hope you enjoy the show. Thank you. This portrait here is a picture taken in 1864 of William Buckingham and his staff.
Lincoln issued a preliminary proclamation giving freedom to black slaves and changing the war's aim. In the midst of war, this is unheard of, from merely reunion to reunion and freedom for blacks. Lincoln adhered strongly to his conviction of keeping the nation together through the preservation of the Union. With his never-changing belief that all men are created equal. Lincoln fought for and issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1 in 1863, and you will celebrate that 150th anniversary here in Norwich with the ringing of the bells, just as you did, Wendale, on January 2, 1863, because this town, like most towns in the North that were waiting for the news on whether Lincoln had the political and moral courage to sign what he said he would sign on September 22, whether he would sign it on January 1, which he did, but it was late afternoon when he signed it. So by the time the news reached Norwich, it was really too late to celebrate, and that's true in most of the other towns and cities that were awaiting for this act to be completed by the president. During a time when slaves had no rights and were considered the property of their owners, Lincoln boldly declared the freedom of all slaves in the southern states was still held by the Confederacy. And he did so based on the theory that he was the commander-in-chief, the slaves were property. In wartime, you can seize the property of the enemy, so I'm seizing them. That was his justification. And the Constitution still protected slavery, didn't it? Until the 13th Amendment would do away with it, and that wasn't ratified until 1865. So, to me, Abraham Lincoln embodied political courage. He was clear and self-confident in his belief that issuing the Emancipation Proclamation was the correct thing to do. During the time he thought about emancipation early in the war, he learned to trust his own judgment, and although he made mistakes, they were not mistakes of self-doubt. For this first prerequisite of political courage, he had to be steady amid a barrage of criticism. And certainly Lincoln was no stranger to criticism from Army of the Potomac Commanding General George Brinton McClellan to soldiers and sailors who believed that they did not enlist to free blacks, but only to restore the Union, the Northern public, to Northern newspaper editors who called him everything from the wooden head in Washington to two-faced, Lincoln responding, "If I had another face, would I wear this one?" And a real term of derision at the time, but I would take it as honorific if it were bestowed today. He was called then Abraham Africanus I for issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. On Sundays, if he had time, he would read editorials about him and his administration and then ask himself the question, is Abraham Lincoln a man or a dog? Lincoln knew that results mattered. He wasn't afraid to push the envelope. He knew that he had to have courage, be steadfast, and stand up for what he believed in. One gets the impression that he would sacrifice everything before retreating from this act of freedom. As Lincoln said thereafter when people encouraged him to back away from emancipation, the promise being made must be kept. I must admit, it's not always easy to stick to your principles, especially when you find yourself standing alone. But to paraphrase Lincoln, as long as you remain true to yourself, if at the end of the day you have lost every other friend on earth, you will at least have one friend left, and that friend shall be the one down inside you. And Lincoln remained true to himself. He was obsessed with character, too. When he spoke of character, he spoke of selflessness and honor. To a critic of emancipation, Lincoln wrote, "Why should they, the black soldier and sailor, do anything for us if we do nothing for them?" In the end, over 200,000 black soldiers and sailors served in the Union Army and Navy. Lincoln's character also enabled him to put aside personal or political animosities for the betterment of the nation. Doris Kearns Goodwin pointed out in her recent book, Team of Rivals, which you've all read, that good leadership sometimes requires teaming up with your political enemies. Doris argues that Lincoln's political genius is revealed through his extraordinary array of personal qualities that enabled him to form friendships with men who had previously opposed him, to repair injured feelings that, left untended, might have escalated into permanent hostility, to assume responsibility for the failures of subordinates, to share credit with ease, and to learn from mistakes. Doris continues that he possessed extraordinary empathy, the gift or curse of putting himself in the place of another, to experience what they were feeling, to understand their motives and desires. And she attributes this to his years as a lawyer, during which Lincoln had developed a keen sense of what people felt, thought, needed, and wanted. Senator Wilson from Massachusetts visited Lincoln in the White House and worried about the president's fragile features after having his public opinion baths almost every day, where hundreds and thousands of supplicants, people who wanted jobs, people who just wanted to shake his hand. And Wilson thought that this was tiring Lincoln out, and he really needed his energy for running the war. And Lincoln responded to Senator Wilson, "They don't have much. They get little. I must see them." Lincoln chose to include political rivals like Seward and Stanton and Chase and Bates in his cabinet because he said these were the strongest men and I had no right to deprive the country of their services. Through his humility, he came from being a simple country boy from the middle of nowhere to crafting a legacy that we honor today. It is not by chance, either, that one of Lincoln's best speeches was delivered on a battlefield on the occasion of dedicating the cemetery for those who fought, died, and were buried there. We remember. Lincoln said that the brave men, living and dead, who struggled on this ground, this battlefield, had consecrated it better than he or anyone else could. Their cause was great and noble. We also remember Lincoln saying that their work was unfinished, and that we, the living, should highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of, by, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. We remember everything he said, and we remember it because he took great pains to say things beautifully. We also remember the second inaugural address, especially the concluding paragraph, the poignant beauty of it. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. 6 weeks later, he was murdered. We say that a man can be known by the company he keeps. A nation can be known and judged by its heroes, whom it honors above all others. We pay ourselves the greatest compliment when we say that Abraham Lincoln is that man for us. So we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the Civil War with fanfare and reverence from those terrible years. We remember the 620,000 men who died north and south, the figures being revised now to something like 750,000. If the same number of Americans per capita had died in Vietnam as died in Civil War, there would be 4 million names on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington instead of 58,000. During the next 4 years, Norwich and the rest of our country will commemorate through many of the activities that you're already engaged with those horrific 4 years between 1861 and 1865. You know, it's Lincoln and the Civil War are bottomless treasures which remain encrusted in myth and still unexplored, at least fully unexplored, which is why a century and a half later, they still claim our attention. Thank you very much. The governor of Illinois called the state militia, and a company was formed in the New Salem, Clary's Groves area, which is about 30 miles northwest of Springfield, Illinois. The village has been recreated to New Salem. Clary's Grove has just disappeared. And Lincoln was elected captain of his company, of his militia company, an honor that he never forgot and considered one of the greatest honors. This is many years later when he wrote a little biography of himself on the eve of the 1860 election, that there was no other honor that pleased him more than being elected captain of his company. And they went forth to fight Black Hawk, never engaged in battle. He was wounded more by the mosquitoes, he would say on the floor of Congress in his only term. But he did get to know, didn't he, what it was like to sleep on the ground, wait for your pay, go without rations. All of those things that we soldiers, how many veterans are here? Let's hear it for them. And where's Karen? 50. How many alum